Everything from clothing to household items are getting more expensive each day. The world of fast fashion has complicated clothing production by outsourcing around the world to whoever can sew them the cheapest. And now you, the consumer, are paying the price with rising costs. American Giant is about keeping things simple and close to home. They aren't affected by tariffs because their products never leave the U.S. So when you buy from American Giant, you're taking a stand for hardworking people, local communities, and quality clothes. American Giant directly supports American manufacturers and ensures you aren't footing that tariff bill. Support American-made, tariff-free clothing with American Giant. Get 20% off your first order when you use promo code STAPLE20 at American-Giant.com. That's 20% off when you use code STAPLE20 at American-Giant.com.
It's a beautiful Saturday morning in the capital city. Welcome to the basketball show. I'm your host, Paul Sir, along with, I can't really call you my sidekick, can I?
I'd say
my wingman.
Wingman. I'll take either of those.
Okay. All right. Second option for shots.
There we go. Yeah.
Always
just space the floor. Ryan, go stand in the corner.
Space the
Heard
floor.
that before.
They have them respect you. I'm going to take the shot, though. Just go get the rebound. This is Paul Sir. I'm the host of the basketball show. Really pleased to be with you. What a great week, Ryan. Wrapping up March Madness for both men and women. We're going to touch on that in the first segment a bit. But now NBA playoffs are looming, and it's we're going into the final, literally the final day, with games that matter, which is really interesting to have the kind of weight placed on the games tomorrow with, I think, the most compelling matchup being the Warriors and the who are the Warriors playing?
Clippers.
Warriors and the Clippers.
I think the winner is destined for a clinched play-in spot in
exactly.
the playoff spot, and the loser's off to the play-in, and it's up for grabs.
Yeah, absolutely. And a couple of the other games have opportunities provided for them as well. Timberwolves, if they beat the hapless Utah Jazz, they'll have to do that without Anthony Edwards.
Hapless is a great word.
Oh, my gosh. There's tanking, and then there's just sewage. And that is, they are just raw sewage this year. What a terrible franchise. So we're going to start out before we introduce our guests for the first hour, actually guests for the first hour, but we'll start out with our poll question.
We're asking which player you would want to build your franchise around today if you were starting a franchise today. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is option 1, Nikola Jokic is option 2, Jason Tatum is option 3, and Giannis Antetokounmpo is option 4. Go on Twitter, basketball_show, and cast your vote. And send your texts on your thoughts, and we will share your thoughts and have Paul react to it.
Well, you know what? I'm really glad you said Twitter. That was really good English, Ryan. I love the Twitter.
You said hapless, I said Twitter. We're on a roll early.
We are. We're going to welcome in our guest today. Steve Sir is going to be joining us for the first hour, and we're going to talk about a variety of things. And we have his daughters, beautiful daughters, my granddaughters, Lila and Isabel, here as well. And we're going to get them on to say something a little bit later as well. But welcome, Steve.
Morning. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's great to have you here. Our poll question, Steve, just to get things started, is if you were going to start an NBA franchise today, would you take Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Nikola Jokic, Giannis Antetokounmpo, or Jason Tatum, taking into account where they're at today, not in terms of their overall body of work, but given the age and stage that they're at, who would you take?
Jokic.
Jokic? Yeah.
Are
you sure? I'm joking.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
I think for me, the type of season that Shai's had is incredible, especially when you take into account he's Canadian and how amazing that is. He's probably going to be the MVP. But Jokic, I believe I saw today he finished the season averaging a triple-double. He's been at the past however many seasons the best player in the world. What he did at the Olympics last summer. I feel like you could build a team around a guy like that who clearly doesn't have an agenda on what kind of numbers he needs. He does what he needs to do to win. He plays the game unselfishly. He makes other guys better. Aaron Gordon was having a rough time and then got traded to Denver, and then all of a sudden his career skyrocketed again. And that's completely due to Jokic. So I think you could put him at the center of it, find good players. There's so many good players in the NBA now, guys who can shoot it, guys who can cut, guys who can move, guys who can defend, and Jokic would fill in all the blanks.
Great take. How about you, Ryan?
I think Jokic is the better player this season. For me, it just comes down to age. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander's a couple years younger. Jokic is 30, and Shai, I found he's 26 years old. He's born in 1998. I think Jokic, as Steve mentioned, is a better player straight up, and again, clinched the triple-double average, joining Russell Westbrook, who did it 6 times, and Oscar Robertson, who did it once, as the only players ever to do that. But for me, it's Shai as 26 years old and leading the best team in the league.
I think, both you can't go wrong on one hand. However, on the other hand, I would go with Jokic as well. He is the best player in the world. His numbers this year are staggeringly good, and historically good. Historic. Gilgeous-Alexander, this is really an interesting, and maybe the most, I was reading an article and I thought this really encapsulated the MVP controversy, if you want to call it, or question this year. You almost have to give it to Gilgeous-Alexander, leading the league in scoring, the efficiency that he plays with, the fact that he defends really well as being such an efficient offensive player. His assist numbers are good. Unbelievable season. And yet you have Jokic. He'll be the greatest player not to win MVP because of the team he's on. And I think where Gilgeous-Alexander gets the nod is they have not just the best record in the league, but they lead the West by 15 games. Just in a very tough, equally talented Western Conference, much tougher top to bottom than the Eastern Conference. Jokic has kept a depleted, reduced team relevant in the West, somewhat relevant in the West, with Jamal Murray in and out of the lineup throughout the year, all of the injuries that Denver's had to deal with. And now we find out, and this will be part of our 3 from deep that we're going to touch on in just a second, now they fire the coach. And there's a front office problem and an ownership problem in Denver as well in terms of how they responded. So we've got 2 for Nicola on our staff, and we look forward to your input about who you would take, SGA, NJ, GA, or JT. And by the way, our text line is 1-833-401-1440. Again, 833-401-1440. Give us your thoughts, your input on the NBA playoffs as they come up. We're going to go back to that in a second, but I'd like to do a little post-mortem on March Madness, which ended on Monday. We had the women's championship. UConn, just did a beatdown in their semifinals and finals. And on the women's side, we're clearly the best team in the NBA. Or the NBA, yeah, they'd be pretty. They wouldn't be very good in the NBA, but the UConn was very, very, very dominant. And then on the men's side, the shocking Duke loss, especially in the manner that it was lost. And then, of course, the Houston seemingly having control of the game over Florida, and them losing as well in a somewhat almost ironic, Steve, dramatic fashion, like the victory that Houston was able to get over Duke. They were similar games.
In ways, yeah. What was interesting, especially when you came down to the end, Houston didn't get a shot attempt in the last 3 possessions, which is really tough when you consider how much was made, and rightfully so, about their ability to get on the offensive glass and create second shots. So some of their best offense would have just been their ability to chase the ball down and get another attempt. A lot was made of their last possession of not getting a shot up, but the 2 prior possessions, they didn't get a shot up either. That killed them. They did almost everything to win the game.
Houston's offense or Florida's defense, or a combination?
There was an interesting quote from Kelvin Sampson. He had a bunch of great quotes because,
he's just a great quote machine.
He is. He's had so much skin in the game. So much of what he does with that program, when he went there, they were doing nothing. A lot was made of how he had to beg, students to come to the arena to watch the gym. Now they're a number 1 seed. They're fighting for the national championship. But he had an interesting quote where he said, for his assistants, whenever they leave to take other jobs, he always tells them, when you get into a huddle, keep it simple and run something you know. Don't try and be the smartest guy in the room. Do something that you know you're going to get a shot with, as opposed to trying to show everybody how smart you are. It was an interesting quote to remember when you saw the last play that Houston ran, because I don't know when you watched it if that was something that they felt entirely comfortable with. I'm sure they'd run it. I don't believe he would say something like that and then draw something they'd never done before. That's not what their program was about. It didn't seem to be built around hypotheticals and what ifs of, if we run this, maybe. But the way that the play shook out, it just seemed like they weren't entirely comfortable. Part of that was Florida's defense. Part of it looked like the look maybe was a little too complicated. They had they swung it to the right side. There was a little brush. They wanted to come and pin down. It was the most elaborate play it looked like they run all night. Florida read it really well. They took away the shot. Unfortunately, he left his feet. Sharp had to kind of let it sit there. And then they didn't even get an attempt. Whereas if you're sitting at home where we all have it figured out and we're the best coaches ever.
Absolutely.
We all know what to do with down one with 10 seconds. But you were hoping that they would just get a shot attempt so that they could make an attempt to make a second play on the ball, and then you'd see what happened.
Here's that is really interesting, because you're right. It was a more complicated play than Houston had run all night. And I'm sure, as you said, that it was something they were familiar with. Maybe it was something that Florida was familiar with too, that could have been. But Ryan, where I thought it was the moment, to be honest. I really thought the moment got to Houston, that and we all know this, and Houston is as battle-tested and as tough as any team in the country. So many games this year where they had to come back and win, and they're not like going to beat you 89-87. They're going to beat you 65-62. So they were ready, but at that point, you're that far ahead, and think of yourself as, you're a young guy. Think of yourself as a player. You have a big lead, and all of a sudden that lead starts to evaporate. That maybe is the toughest time to play, is when you're in control and then you're not in control and the other team's surging. To me, my read was the other team was surging and they got rattled.
That's kind of what we were talking about a couple weeks ago when Declan was on the show. It's that unpredictability you have with the younger guys in that level of Division I. It's both paradoxical and true that it's because the players are not as good as the NBA players, it makes more entertaining. And you're saying they get rattled. Like in the NBA, you don't get as rattled as you do in college basketball. And I think that's kind of what you're touching on. Like, they don't have the experience that some of the other players have, and getting rattled is going to happen. And it doesn't completely answer your question, but I just wanted to comment on that. That's what makes it so entertaining, and it made the game so entertaining, and that's the appeal of March to a lot of fans.
100%. And Steve, with your experience in Division I and playing, against some of the top teams in the country like Kansas, Arizona, when they were at their peaks, and then, getting into the Big Sky playoffs and getting to the championship game. And I think of your last year, the tight game against Weber State. And it really came down to one of your teammates. Probably, if you had to point to it, you had a teammate that was injured who couldn't play. It was an integral part of your starting lineup. But one of your top players missing a point-blank, wide-open layup at the very critical moment. I guess that's what I'm referring to, is the moment in those situations that are, unless you're in that moment, you don't know how tough it really is.
It is. It's impossible to watch a game like that, or any of these games, and not at some point factor in these players are young, they're kids, they're still figuring a lot of stuff out, they're still going through a lot of development. This is maybe the most pressure-filled game they'll ever see. If any of these guys go on to the NBA, that's not an NBA game. You're not playing in a football stadium with millions and millions of people at home. It's an incredible moment, which makes it all the more impressive in March Madness history when guys do rise to the occasion and hit these tough shots and make these big plays, because when it doesn't go that way, you do have to be fair and say, but this is so difficult and so strenuous mentally and physically. So when you come up an inch short, yeah, it's the moment. There's so much pressure and there's so much riding on it, and it's impossible not for that to cross your mind. And you see in those moments when you're running a play, you're trying to get a shot up, and how many things can go wrong. And one little thing goes wrong, the other team across from them is tough. They know what's at stake too. and before you know it, you don't get a shot up.
I'm going to go off topic from where we had scripted because I really want to touch on this. And good morning to everybody. You're listening to the Basketball Show, and you're joined today by Ryan Reed, Steve Sir, Lila Sir, Isabel Sir, and Paul Sir. We're all
feel outnumbered a little bit.
Yeah, you are being ganged up on, and that we're on the sports leader in Edmonton, Sports 1440. I want to talk about Duke's loss. Youngest team, talented team, loaded with NBA talent, player of the year in Cooper Flagg. But I want to talk about a couple of things. Number one, I want to touch on officiating. I found the officiating in the Houston Florida championship game it was like there were two different games because the first half was so physical and so few fouls were called. Second half gets started. It's 5-0. Florida has 5 fouls. Houston has none. Then all of a sudden it's 8-6 for Houston with 8 fouls. The game didn't change as far as I could see, but what did change is what was being called. I don't want to touch on that. I want to touch on Duke because there was a foul called on Cooper Flagg at the end that sends, I believe it was Roberts to the line, who hit 2. Yep. And it was an over-the-back call. And when you look at the replay, there was contact with Flagg's left arm on Roberts' shoulder where he tips the ball on a missed free throw, but it goes to Houston. So it's like as you talk about advantage, there's no advantage created by the contact. But probably the softest call that you could call almost on every possession in terms of actual contact and the effect on the play. Now, it wasn't intentional. I don't feel there's any conspiracy here. But my gosh, I find that frustrating that put Houston in a position to hit the 2 free throws. Steve, what are your thoughts on that? Is that just an old man just picking on one final little thing, or is that something that bothers you too in terms of officiating?
Well, if you're on the court, for sure it bothers you. If you're on the receiving end of it. Initially when you watch the game, you see the call, it stands out. It probably was one that you thought if you play this out 10 different ways, they don't call that, and Houston just has to go down and take a shot and make a play. Okay, it wasn't a good call. But what I found interesting was how Duke, because you practice this stuff, like having been in it myself and talking with other guys who played at different programs, you always do situational stuff in practice. Hey, the other team's in bonus, they're shooting 2 free throws, we're down 1, they make both, we're down 3, there's a timeout, you get the ball here. What are we running? And one of them, at least at our school, one of them was there's a bad call, you're frustrated, you're upset. It doesn't change anything. You still have to go to the other end. They got to shoot it, and then it's situational. And what I thought was interesting with Duke, and maybe this is where they showed their age, I thought a little bit of it was what they were running. They didn't. They couldn't handle their pressure. Flagg got a shot up, and I think that's what you try and do in that situation. If you give the ball to your best player, he tried to get to the rim, got cut off. He shot a pull up, probably what you're going to have to live with. But then at the end, when they threw that full court pass, and there was the thing about they didn't want Houston to maybe foul. You had time and you didn't get a good shot up. So situationally, it just seemed like they didn't handle it very well because sure there was a bad call, but you still had time to get a shot up and to make a play, and they didn't really do that. That was what I thought was more perplexing when you got into it, because Duke played a great game, and then right down to the last little bit when Houston made their push and Duke couldn't handle their pressure, then it really felt like it turned into another game.
Really well encapsulated, and actually that was the direction I was going to take this conversation. Yeah, that happened to Flagg, and had his teammate, and I think it was the Australian kid who had missed a free throw. Yeah. Duke had chance after chance, of course. But then Roberts, who's like a 60-some% free throw shooter, went down and hit both. Like, he really was ready for the moment. But this is a generational criticism I have of Duke. Under Mike Krzyzewski, the same thing. I remember back in the 90s watching the strong Duke teams, and I think their key player at that time is now an NBA executive, Trajan Langdon. But what bugged me the most about Duke, and it bugged me when I was watching the other night, is what they didn't run to get shots. And that they did basically the NBA clear out on the last 3 possessions for Flag against a really top defensive team that keyed on him and was really well prepared for that moment. And obviously Duke wasn't. And to put it in Flag's hand, like you said, the shot that he had at the end, he just short-armed it. Yeah. He had a clear look. He was tight on the shot, on the fadeaway. He could have hit it just as easily if he had just stepped into his shot. He wasn't contested enough to be that short. But I always have found with Duke and the way they were not ready and looked like utter chaos against the pressure, Ryan, and not even able to get the ball in and handle that pressure. Yeah, that is youth, but I also thought that was youth in Shire, but I also think it's a Duke systemic thing too, is sometimes I've seen over their great, glorious history, the reliance on Krzyzewski on motion offense, not running a set to try to get somebody a specific look, but rather taking that NBA approach of best player, get the shot, and missing guys that are potentially open. And in the second half, they didn't even go to Knipple at all. They just went away from him. I really felt like the second half got away from Duke as much as, and a lot of it came from the intensity and the courage and the guts and the persistence of Houston.
I think you hit it right on the nose. When you're with Cooper Flag, you're given the ball, just like attack the defense, and that's exactly what Houston game planned for. As when you're playing against those younger kids, they're comfortable with what they know. So when they're guarding Cooper Flag, and they've done this in practice, when they're focusing on one guy, and you have one guy trying to break the defense down, they're very comfortable with that. Cooper Flag did have 27 points and 7
great game,
spectacular. But Houston's been through the reps of what that looks like, right? I wanted a quick shout out for a 7'1" man in Kaman Malich who had 0 rebounds for Duke during that game. That was crazy to me. I think I saw that stat the next day. I didn't really think about it during the game. During the game, I was just kind of watching. But 7'1" and 0 rebounds.
Some of the worst rebounders I played with were tall guys.
That's fair enough. So their whole life they're just like reaching.
They have slow hands.
Fair enough.
A lot of times. But Steve, you've played against and with some phenomenal players. But who are the best rebounders you play with?
One teammate of mine that's another Canadian named Kyle Landry was a great rebounder because he had one a gift for anticipation, good nose for the ball. But then he also just pursued it. He would get in there and muck it up, and he wasn't afraid if he got hit. So, yeah, I think what Ryan's saying, you get big guys and you assume they're going to mix it up. There's a bunch of big guys that have no interest in going after the ball unless it falls in their hands. And then there's other guys who are a little bit undersized that just won't stop until somebody bumps them or pushes them off the ball. There was one point in the game where Flag hit that 3 at about the break line on the right side, and that pushed him up 9.
Yes.
It was probably a little bit, if it wasn't 3 minutes left, it was a shade under.
It was under 3.
The pace of the game seemed to be like, all right, if Duke just handles what they need to do, that they should be able. And what was interesting, like Ryan pointed out, all of a sudden Houston decided or made the choice to just muck it up, throw some pressure on them, disrupt their guards, bringing the ball up the court. I've heard the rumor that there was Houston was saving that. Risky to go down 9 in a Final Four and say now we're going to slap on our pressure and it's going to save us. Kelvin Sampson did another quote where they were talking about Roberts playing Flag straight up, and they said Flag's a great player. Obviously he was the best player in the game, but he's still 18. He's a young kid. And Roberts, I believe, has been in college for 5 or 6 years.
He's 23.
Yeah, and Sampson had said, we're going to bank on the man that's on our team as opposed to the young man that's on the other. And
That's a great quote.
It is. I mean, he was filled with them, and it was awesome that they made this run so they could keep interviewing him more. But he was right. There's still a huge component of this, going back to what we talked about before, where you have a team like Houston that has older guys that have been through this, that have a chip on their shoulder, that are edgy, that have maybe been in positions where they haven't been in the Final Four, and you're going to lean on that a little bit. And if you lose, you lose. But you got to rely on your guys. And I think especially after the Duke game, what stands out about Sampson's attitude is, I'm going to win or lose with my guys. And we're going to trust that we've done the work, that if Cooper Flag, the consensus upcoming #1 draft pick, is going to go one-on-one with our guys. We trust that he's able to stand in there and handle it. And he did. And all of a sudden you're in the title game, and then there's a interesting flip-flop of the roles with Florida. But it was really cool to see just the belief in your players, even though, like we said before, that they're young kids, the belief of like, we've been there, we've repped it, it's one-on-one, you just got to play.
Really interesting, because as you were talking about that, I was just thinking, you've got the quintessential old school coach in Calvin Sampson.
Yeah.
When kids come to Houston, the way he describes it is the first thing they do is have the conversation. This is going to be the hardest thing you ever done in your life. Mm-hmm. If you're not up for this, you better go find another school, because we're not compromising our style for your needs. So, you're going to play this way or you're not going to play. Mm-hmm. Versus Duke, and they work really hard. It's very impressive to watch how hard Duke plays, but it's a whole different thing. NIL money, bringing in the biggest, best names in the business, and it sounds like that's a recruiting class they have. John Shire, a Dookie as a player, everything like that. So you've got just the best contrast in styles. And we're going to run a little long here, and we have to go to break in a couple minutes. But two things stood out as you were just describing that last couple of minutes in the semifinals, Steve. And that is, number one, Houston did pull it out, and certainly they didn't anticipate being down 9, but that's when they decided to pull out the full court press. That's number one. Duke's inability to be ready for that and to even get the ball in bounds. But the third thing that really jumped out at me is Houston didn't foul.
Yes.
And everybody at every level at that juncture in the game when you're down 9 usually fouls.
Yep.
And I think that was and then they hit a couple of incredible shots as well. You got to make the shots.
No doubt. I mean, when you talk about Sharp, he had such a awful ending to the game. I mean awful from a perspective of that's going to be with him forever.
Right.
Where you don't get the shot up, and it's so easy for him to be the target of all this negative stuff. Houston's not in the final if he doesn't hit that big three. It's 67-61, and he gets out there and hits a huge shot, and all of a sudden they got life. They're not in that game without him. So that's what's amazing about college basketball. In 2 nights, you can swing from, wow, they beat Duke, but remember that Kansas game where they pushed it to double overtime. They're built for this. They had the reps, had the experience. And then 2 nights later, it's, well, the inexperience and the youth. And, it's what's incredible about the game is it can change so quickly. And, the environment is the same arena, same floor, same background. And there's just a little difference.
Little difference, and a final comment would be the Florida game where Houston absolutely locked down the tournament MVP, Walter Clayton Jr. I think he had 1 point at halftime. 0 points at halftime. Absolutely. He looked like he just wanted no part of the game. Houston had him shaken. But then he just found moments. And what I really loved, and this goes to your point about the NCAA, is the actions that they run to get a player involved. They ran a couple of specific curl cuts for Clayton, and they have great passing bigs.
Yeah.
And got him going to the basket in an and one that really gave them life again. That is the magic of the NCAA. So now we're going to take a break right now. When we come back, we're going to start talking about, is there magic in the NBA and the playoffs that are looming. So we're going to have a really good discussion about that. We have Steve Sir with his daughters Isabel and Lila with us, Ryan Reed, myself, Paul Sir, welcoming you to the basketball show on this beautiful Saturday morning in the capital city, here on your sports leader, Sports 1440. Song, Hotel California by the Eagles. Here on the basketball show, Sports 1440, Paul Sir, Ryan Reed, Steve Sir. Guys, this past week in the NBA, in a season that has been filled with unexpected, unparalleled, and bizarre trades and now firings being the center of discussion. And the most recent one really is perplexing. And I've read actually a number of articles about it, and included in those articles are writers who understood and made a point of interviewing people around the Nuggets organization and why they made this move at this time, and basically said, you know what, it's weird, it's bizarre, but I kind of get it because things were really falling apart in the front office. The conflict between general manager Calvin Booth and head coach Mike Malone, it just had been getting out of control in terms of conflict that was spilling into the locker room and starting to force players to take sides. And they just felt like going into the playoffs, they had to clean house in those two positions to give the team an opportunity with an assistant coach that apparently is very, very popular among the players. And that's why they made the move at this time. But having, and this is on the heels of a Memphis Grizzly firing, again, team solidly in the playoff picture. And the results since the firing have not been good. They've been a shadow of themselves now and are limping into the playoffs. And I think all of us would be surprised if they make it into the playoff round once the play-in games are done. So, Steve, in this year of the Luka Laker trade, in this year of Jimmy Butler going to Golden State, now these firings, the most recent firing with a guy who just won an NBA championship in 2023, to be axed like that, what are your thoughts? Like, is that something that makes some sense, or is this just ownership once again realizing they write the checks and they're going to do what they're going to do?
Seems to show another disconnect in the NBA between front office and coaching staff, where you have what the money men decide is the strategy. They don't want to get past a certain apron. They don't want to do this. They don't want to do that. The coaches are coaching to win, and you're going to want to remain competitive. I know a lot of the stuff that was written over however many months that Malone's issue was, what are we doing here? Are we rebuilding? Are we trying to be competitive? Are we trying to win? Like, what are we doing? And I think one of the main things it points out is the mismanagement of handling a guy who's got a window to be the best player in the NBA. He already has been with Jokic, and how you're mismanaging that. Not similar because it's not nearly as idiotic as what Dallas did with Luka, but you have a guy that's a top guy in the NBA, and you're not building something around him to try and win now. You have these precious moments where he's healthy, he's in his prime. Like Ryan mentioned earlier, he's 30. These are still his good years. You can't waste them. Or if you're going to waste them, then get off of it. Trade them, do the whole reboot, do the whole rebuild. But just treading water, I got to imagine if you're a guy like Malone, who's famous for being pretty pissy and competitive, why are you going to just sit idle? You're going to lose Caldwell Pope. You're going to lose, other players to free agency, or you're not matching. You're not matching. You're not matching salaries, and you're bringing young guys in, and you're hoping young guys are okay. That's tough when you're a year and some removed from winning the title.
Well, and one of the conflicts that was fairly public was the fact that GM Booth was very upset at how Malone was handling the rotation. He wanted Booth wanted Malone to be playing his younger players instead of Russell Westbrook, which is another part of this, this equation. But to make Westbrook in any way the scapegoat in this, despite all of the boneheaded stuff the guy is capable of doing, it's still the coach's decision. It's not the GM getting into the locker room and saying, you got to play these young guys.
But that's where it becomes difficult, where you have GMs or front office teams that put rosters together, make moves, and then the expectation is, and then the expectation is, well, now you got to coach it. And you see with the good teams in the NBA, there's no secrets, even though they try and make it out to be like there are. There's, on the good teams, clear communication between front office and coaching staffs of who are we getting, what's the strategy, how are we drafting. If you take a Golden State, are we doing the Jimmy Butler thing? Everybody's all in on that. But then you got the ones that are struggling or maybe sliding down the ladder a little bit of, we're going to make this move. And you don't know if the coaching staff's either on board or if they even know about it. So there you have that really fine balance in the NBA of front office people who build the roster and then have their reputations at stake of, we think this will be a competitive team if the roster gets played the way that we hope it is. And then you got a coach that says, well, I want to win, and this is who I think is going to win. So you're going to sign guys to extensions, and then you're going to have a guy like Malone be like, oh, he's not ready, and sit him. How is that not going to create some kind of issue within your organization? And you see, obviously, how it gets handled. Let's get rid of both of them, and hopefully that'll jolt the team into doing something. But you're almost, in a way, but reading between the lines, kind of punting on this season, where it's like, hopefully this will do something, and if it doesn't, well, we were going to lose anyway.
Yeah, and to me, Ryan, the whole X factor in all of this, what you're flirting with is the buy-in from the greatest player in the world. What are they going to do now in terms of who they hire in those positions and who they sign to accomplish what you described very well, Steve, to build around Jokic at this juncture in his career. And Ryan, you being the diehard, passionate Sacramento Kings fan that you are, they're a case in point of a disastrous. They had a good thing going about 5 years ago, and then they started mucking with their front office and their coaches and went away from stability and went to Band-Aids, and it's been pretty much a train wreck since then, even though they have some very good players. But you just can see a stable, systematic organization like Boston or now OKC. And, of course, they're blessed with all these great draft picks on astute trades that Denver hasn't made. But the parallel is when you have front office disruption, when you have guys like Malone and Booth in the hallways apparently criticizing each other to other people and that getting back to the other. And now all of a sudden, like any organization, be it a teacher's lounge or by the water cooler in a corporation, you're going to start seeing that seep into everything that no organization is immune from that kind of dissension. It's
actually directly related to Mike Malone, the Kings' mishaps, because I remember when they fired him in 2014, I was a younger guy, but I was still a diehard Kings fan, and I was like, why? I was confused why the Kings were doing this.
You were a King fan in your diapers.
Exactly. Oh, yeah. No, for 13, hopefully not. Yeah. But let's not pull up the film on that one. But
yes.
We fired him, and he went on to coach the Nuggets, and the rest is history, as you mentioned. But for those who don't know directly what Mike Malone said, it was a big thing. It was in a press conference. So I think two things can be true about this, where he's saying there may be he's right about what he's saying, but he also lost the locker room completely. He said, quote, "I don't really care." When he was responding to if the players will find out about his candor in this interview, he said, "I don't really care. It's not my job to evaluate how they take things. My job is to be honest and sometimes brutally honest. And tonight it was brutally honest message, and the guys that are full of crap won't hear it. You know, they'll say coach is tripping, and the guys that maybe do really care, they're not going to go back and what their minutes, because nobody watches their minutes. Nobody watches film. So we'll have to show them the film." And I said, if somebody disagrees with me, please speak up. And nobody said a word. So again, I'm not really concerned with how they took that message.
Now, Steve, you're from a different era in terms of playing. Coaches did things, your coach included, that it's very hard to do now in terms of how you talk to players, how you treat players, how you regard players, and what is expected of players. I mean, in your generation, it was kind of on the backside of the old school, where players, you just come and suck it up and the coach is going to say whatever he wants to say to you. That's a bit of a throwback quote that Ryan just read. But on the flip side, when you listen to the words and their intent, there's a lot of truth in it. But in the modern era, with players having as much sway as they have right now, in the NBA in particular, that's not the kind of message that players want to hear, is it?
Sounds a bit like he knew the writing was on the wall, and if I'm going to get sent out of here, then I'm going to say a couple things first.
Yeah,
Ryan's 100% right. Those are not quotes from a coach that believes he still has a hold on the locker room.
Mm-hmm.
Those are quotes from a guy that thinks that these guys are seen in a different way that I am. I think the way that they're seen is wrong. And if they're going to show me give me my papers and show me the door, then I'm going to say that everybody's full of it first and that they don't take this seriously enough. You wonder at times, if guys aren't taking it seriously, why has that seeped in and has has for some reason become acceptable. On an NBA staff where there's so many people involved with the players' development, so many people involved with the players' accountability, if nobody's watching video, then what's everybody doing all day? But it's been an interesting thing to follow this year with the NBA with multiple teams, of how there's been these things that have happened gradually over days, weeks, and months. And it's one of the most interesting things about the league at this point is you get down to these finer details and important days, and all of a sudden there's all this stuff that really matters during this really long season where nobody keeps it a secret that guys aren't playing very hard, and there's not a big attention to detail, and there's a lot of stuff that's being slipped through the cracks, and players aren't playing, and so-and-so, nobody knows what he's doing. And then all of a sudden it's like, why aren't we in the playoffs? Why aren't we a top 3 seed? And like you see it with a team like Phoenix. Why aren't we good? It's like, because you guys don't play hard. You got 7 guys who are all on a different page, and then all of a sudden at the end of the year, the sky is falling. How did we not do this? You could have watched at any point during the season to see this is not working. Denver's been different because they won the title in 2023. They have a superstar. They have, at least in the past, showed signs of being a stable franchise, and then all of a sudden they're just not. So you got to imagine like all those little things that are not being taken care of are a crescendo during this press conference where he's just saying, I don't care. The guys don't take it seriously. I don't care if anybody takes this the wrong way. We're not doing this the right way. And clearly he's kind of saying without saying it is, I'm probably on the way out.
It's interesting you bring up Phoenix, and you're listening to the Basketball Show, Sports 1440, Ryan, Steve, Lila, Izzy, and Paul with you today. Now, you bring up Phoenix. I read a great article in The Athletic about the Phoenix disaster, and it's one of the benchmark disasters in NBA history of going all in on the big 3, going out, giving away the house to get Durant, giving away the rest of the house to get, of all people, Bradley Beal, giving him a no-trade clause, and banking your whole future on those 3, and then building a mediocre team around them and being $152 million over the salary cap. $152 million over, with no latitude now other than to trade away Devin Booker, who remains one of, a top 20 NBA player, top 15, top 20 NBA player. But you've got to get rid of Durant and or Devin Booker and start a massive rebuild, because it is an abject total failure. And when you read about the owner, it is just ego personified, and just how the culture of that team is an absolute shambles. Now you switch over to small market teams like OKC, to a certain extent Minnesota, and a couple of other teams that have had fairly good seasons and fairly good runs. They've done things slightly differently. OKC being the ultimate small market success story. Boston certainly, with being able to accumulate the kind of draft picks they have and build the talent and remaining stable through this all. But going back to what's gone on in the NBA this year, and I really want to touch on how hard players play. The other night I watched I watched Memphis play Minnesota. Minnesota had 52 points in this third quarter. They were hitting threes left and right, but they were wide open threes because Memphis was not playing hard at all. And I think the tanking that's gone on this year, Steve, the fact that a lot of players are just, mailing it in at the end of the year, that doesn't bode well for the reputation of the NBA. Does that, though, even really matter?
I think we'll have to wait and see. You take a franchise, say Philadelphia as an example, that made a major offseason signing in Paul George. There was the speculation that this could be, make them a contender. Are they going to push Boston? And they've just been a disaster. Embiid's not healthy. Nobody knows what's going on with him. Paul George is getting injections in his finger from there's all this weird stuff. And then they just flip the switch and they say, we're done. and we're shutting Embiid down. There's all the stuff about should he have played in the Olympics last year, stuff about his knee, stuff about his weight. And you look at all of that, and one, you go like, as a fan base, I mean, Phillies has tradition. They have history. When they're good, they're as supported as anybody in the NBA. Can't imagine that anybody's a happy 76ers fan right now. Does that mean they won't show up next year? I don't know. Odds are they will if they do something to show that they're trying to be competitive. Same with Phoenix. If you move somebody, you bring somebody exciting in, or you just sell it all and try and get to your fan base. We're doing this total rebuild. We're going to hopefully do it around Booker, try and link it back to the last time they had success when they were in the final, when Booker was a huge part of that. I think it remains to be seen. They're making so much money with their TV deal, or at least that's what they continue to tell, is that this is why this is happening. They're just killing it with, foreign markets. Salaries are going to continue to go up. Expansion is probably in the future for the NBA to, bad kept secrets of Vegas and Seattle. They've never had more good players than they have right now, but you still see 76ers and Phoenix subscribing to the philosophy and the strategy from however many years ago of you need 3 really good players and the rest will just figure itself out. Whereas the other teams in the NBA that are good had said, like, yeah, you need guys that at the end of the game are going to get certain things done, but you need a good roster. You have to have good size. The whole idea of like you can play small ball all the time, that's not true. You have to have some size. You have to shoot the ball really well. At least the teams that are playing well, Celtics shoot more threes than anybody. But you have to have guys that come in and do things, defend, rebound, take pride in their minutes. And the teams that struggle have leaned so heavy into the superstars are just going to fill in all the cracks, as opposed to the good teams have said, like, you still need a nucleus. There has to be good role players that sit around these superstars, because if guys get hurt, if you go on droughts, if you have trouble, you can still play and you can still make changes and you can move the roster in and out. But you can't just do that. We're just going to lean on 3 guys and expect all of it to work out.
Well, and I think it points to, and Ryan, it points to the concept of culture. We talk about that a lot in the NCAA. Houston has a specific culture. Duke has a culture. You're expected to be part of that culture. That's also prevalent in the NBA. It's like you can't escape that in any organization and just build your company, your school, your team around talent. You have to have a culture. I was thinking about the long list of teams that fit into that discussion or that description you just made, Steve, like New Orleans, shutting Zion down, Utah, the Raptors. They've run it like a G League team this year, like resting players intermittently just to play their G League guys for the last 30 or 40 games.
You're mentioning making culture is a good thing, but it can also totally be making a bad culture as well, too, right? With the current NBA, Embiid not playing at all. I saw a stat the other day. Since 2014, when Embiid was drafted out of Kansas, speaking of good cultures, Carmelo Anthony has played more games in the NBA since then.
And when did
he retired 2 years ago? And that's a crazy thing. So making
stat.
that bad culture in Philadelphia, it's okay to just be a part-time NBA player. Like even going back to Kyrie a couple years ago, just being a part-time NBA player, whether that be injuries I get, but when it's like you're just like you feel tired and you're saving yourself for the playoffs. You have to make the playoffs too. What are you saving yourself for if your team is one of the worst in the league? I think a lot of these teams at the bottom of the league are going to be so reliant on this lottery coming up for Cooper Flagg. Mm-hmm. That's going to improve. That should improve. Cooper Flagg feels like he's going to be he's a good kid. I think he's going to help improve a culture, and he strikes me as somebody who doesn't want to take games off either. So I think there's going to be a lot of teams that are going to be burnt out and pretty upset when they don't win Cooper Flagg. Because, again, the bottom 4 teams had the exact same odds.
It's going to be the Cooper Flagg sweepstakes now coming to fruition is going to be really interesting. Steve, we only have you for a few more minutes. I do want to make the jump to 3x3 for a couple of minutes, if we could. Sure. 3x3 season is underway. They had the Champions Cup in Thailand. The World Tour, the Women's Series are getting ready to get going. You're coaching again this year the national teams in Mongolia, both the men and the women. Just played in the Asia Cup. Ulaanbaatar in Mongolia will be hosting the World Cup coming up. Talk about the post-Olympics 3x3 and what sense you have of what this season's going to be like? The Olympics, for instance, just announced they're going from 8 teams to 12 teams. That's a big step. That means the Olympic Committee has bought into 3x3. It was a huge success in terms of viewership globally in the Paris Olympics. So what are you seeing in what you sense is going on within 3x3 in terms of its growth and development?
Continued growth is probably the first thing you would jump to. The Paris Olympics went so well for excitement, for attendance, for viewership. There were all these things you could point to say that was as good as we hoped and probably better. So continued growth of the sport. I think a lot of countries are going to be trying some stuff. This is the beginning of the new quad. 4 years out.
What do you mean trying some stuff?
Maybe some new players, playing some younger guys, mixing up some things. I think you're going to see some experimental things in 3x3 as far as what people feel is the best strategy to build towards LA. Obviously, there's still a lot to play for, even if you are feeling like, LA is 4 years away. It's going to get here quick, really quick. And especially with the added incentive now, there's going to be 4 more spots to play for in LA. It's not going to be one of those things now where you just get serious the year before and try and pull guys in and pull women in and say, all right, now it's time for us to buckle down. You have to build and I think really define and develop what you want your national program to resemble and how the Pro Tours connect to that, of what you can use for playing and development in order to strengthen your national team, whether it's to broaden your talent pool, whether it's you take your core guys and core girls and you just make them as tough as they can possibly be and then hope like crazy that nobody gets hurt. We have a big year in Mongolia. We're hosting the World Cup, we're hosting a World Tour, hosting a women's series. So there's a lot of excitement and a lot of expectation, that it's not just going to be something that comes through here and everybody has fun. It's going to be something that comes through and you hope that local teams represent and play well at. I think it's going to be a really good year for the sport though, because you're seeing improvement in a variety of areas. The Asia Cup was better. You're seeing countries that are starting to understand what the sport requires to do well. It's not leaps and bounds, but when you compare it to a couple of years ago, it's better. Even at the America Cup last year playing for Canada, there were signs that some countries are starting to figure this out. You don't just grab 4 guys from 5-on-5 who have never played it before, but because they're good 5-on-5 players in your area and you just bring them. Countries are trying to lean into the idea of you do got to get some reps at this. You need a little bit of experience. Continuity is valuable. And then respect for the sport. There have been players that have come in that just think they're going to be better. And once the game starts and they realize, oh man, this is harder than I thought it was going to be and I'm not better. What the hell do I do? Those kind of players, it's tougher. And I think people in decision-making positions have realized that's probably not what we want to lean on if we expect to win anything. So it's going to be an exciting year for 3x3. Edmonton hosts the lone Canadian World Tour stop and lone Canadian Women's Series stop. So Edmonton continues to be a leader on this side of the world for the sport. Mongolia continues to be a leader on that side of the world for the sport in Asia. And it's exciting to see how those things connect, even though we're, geographically far apart. So for the people who are fans of the sport, I'd say there's going to be a lot of good basketball to play and a lot of good basketball to watch. For the Canadian teams, I'd say, wherever you have a chance to watch them and support them and get out and do that, because we're going to have a good team on the men and the women's side. And if you don't mind throwing a couple cheers towards Mongolia, that'd be great as well.
100%. Taking a nation that's a non-basketball nation that you work in, Steve, and doing the work that you've done and seeing the improvement that's been made is, bringing your expertise and experience to them has made a big difference. And I echo exactly what you're saying. Everybody to a person who comes to a 3x3 event that I've ever spoken with, if they hadn't been there before, always leaves and says the same thing. Man, I had no idea how much fun it was, how fast it was, how physical it was, and how skilled it was. Mm-hmm. And I can't wait to see it again. So July 31st to August 3rd here in West Edmonton Mall, where our studios are located. We're going to have the top men's and women's teams in the world here. So We'll be talking more and more about that over the next weeks. Steve, thank you so much for being here today. Isabel, Lila, thank you for being so patient and being here today as well. It's been great having you come by. Now go make Dad buy you stuff and in the mall. So, Steve, thank you very much today.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Okay, you're listening to the Basketball Show on Sports 1440. We're going to take a break. When we come back, Ryan and I are going to go really deep into the weeds on the NBA.